So look, we've got two things here. What's your brand's big idea and how do you own it? We could cut that down to even simpler language. How do you stop wasting money? And how do you connect better to your consumers? So if you were here last year, who was here last year? Stick your hands up if you were here last year. Okay, so there's a handful of you. Last year, I heard one of the best talks I've ever heard from Daniel Yarosh, who worked as a consultant to the beauty business. And it was a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant talk, and I really, really enjoyed it. Because when people are talking about beauty as a big idea, what are L'Oreal actually selling? As Daniel showed us, we might say something like, oh, it's youth, or it's fertility. But in fact, what L'Oreal are actually selling is health, as we learned from Daniel. And I've got a good example of why L'Oreal are actually selling health, not fertility or beauty. And this wonderful lady appeared on Twitter a couple of months ago. A bloke posted this picture and said, my mum is a postwoman, and today she delivered something really important. And she said to this woman, can I take a photograph of you? And she said, I want to put it on the internet. And she said, will everybody see it? And she said, yes. And she said, take a picture and post it up there. Now, this lady is wearing makeup. She's not wearing makeup to look young. She's not looking to have a baby, because I can tell you why. Because what was being delivered is that, and anybody in England could tell how old this lady was, because that is a telegram from the Queen. And she was 100 years old 2 or 3 weeks ago. Okay, so that big idea about health absolutely holds true. Okay, women are not wearing makeup to attract men, they're wearing makeup to feel healthy. So we can start to guess some of these things. Are Gillette selling a smooth face? Tell me what Gillette is selling. Come on, you're not going to get away with this. You're going to have to say something. Otherwise, I go quiet. What are Gillette selling? Masculinity. You know, Gillette are selling masculinity. It's about what it means to be a man. Are BMW selling engineering? Sure, they talk about it, but they're not selling engineering. It's a very, very masculine brand, actually, and what they're selling is success. So getting underneath the big idea is a really important thing, and I want you to start thinking about the big idea that is connected to your brands and then how you own those emotionally. I'm going to show you how to do it. It's very easy to say this only. We always see these big company examples. You know, this big brand did this big brand did that. But we're only a small company, and our big thing and our big idea is listening. We are on a mission to make brands better listeners, because research that is based around talking at people is failing dismally. But if we start listening, as I'm going to show you, you can understand, if you listen deeply enough, people are telling you exactly how they want you to sell to them. Okay? So I'm going to give you some examples as well, and about what this is, and do some case studies, but I want you to start thinking about how some of these things might apply to your brand. And this is really about putting the brand into context. So what does that mean? There is a massive gap between strategy and execution. Strategy without a context of who else is trying to seduce your customers. We see business as a very simple thing, making and maintaining relationships. People who are your rivals in love, if you don't understand what they are doing to attract the people that you wish to attract, and if you don't listen to the people that you want to attract, then you are not going to be very successful. So a strategy that does not understand that is simply going to be a policy. And execution, brand communications that work without a context, are just hit and hope. it's just a waste of money. So context is about understanding the messages and the conversations out there in the marketplace between consumers and your rivals in love. And there are lots of different contexts that you may need to understand as a brand, and you may want to own some of these big ideas. I'm going to give you 4 of these examples. You might want to understand an entire market. So I'm going to show you this afternoon something which is right up to date. In fact, this is so up to date, we're not doing our second major debrief until next Tuesday. Okay, and the question here is, what is malt whiskey? Some people need to understand a problem. Now, earlier on, we had the reference to the issue, effectively, of are you moving towards something or are you moving away from something? Some people have to understand a problem. And I'm going to give you an example of some work that we did in understanding what breast cancer is. We have also just finished some work for Kellogg's understanding what breakfast is. And maybe your brand needs to understand an occasion. What's marriage, for example? What are birthdays? And then there are things like attributes. This particular attribute I'm going to talk to you about is what is creativity? Okay, and how do you start to own these ideas? How can you own a market and understand what something is? How can you understand the emotions underneath a problem and communicate in a way that connects? And how can you own an occasion or an attribute? But there are other things. You can own a particular time. Thank Crunchy, it's Friday. So what is Friday? How do you communicate to own Friday? You could own an activity. We've done a lot of work for sport. If you saw me here last year, about how we helped Adidas understand what sport was and demonstrated to them that a large proportion of their spend was actually helping Nike by declaring that sport was war. Or you could own a feeling. What is a feeling? Or a value, okay? So the only 2 areas we have not worked on is time and feeling, but we've worked on all other 6. I'm going to share those with you. And I want you to just take 10 seconds to think about your brand and what is the big idea behind your brand that you need to understand. Okay, right, I'm going to share a quick story with you, and then I'm going to test you, okay? I'm going to ask you something. Now, I was sitting at a conference about 8 months ago, and there was someone very important from Marks & Spencer's, a guy who runs all of their corporate social responsibility stuff, and he was with people from EY and Side Business School, and they were talking about purpose, and it was all really important. And Mike said, look, we've got 4 internal values, only 4 internal values, and these were the internal values. This is a picture from their head office. They've got these 4 internal values, and I went up to him at the end of he said, oh, sorry, we've got 4 internal values, only one of them is working. One of them is working really, really well. I went up to him at the end of his talk, and I said, hi, Mike, I'm Alastair, I'm from Linguabrand. I've got a proposition for you. I said, I'm going to name the value that is working, right? If I get it wrong, you get £20. And if I get it right, you give me a meeting. Right? Now, I won that bet. I was 95% certain that I would win that bet. And I got a 25% chance. Put up your hand if you're confident that you could win the meeting. Okay, now that's the test. The test is not for you, the test is for me. Because by the end of this, I want to see a lot more of you being confident about that. Okay, that's the nature of the test. So I'm not giving you any problems, I'm giving myself a problem. Okay, so now we start just very, very quickly on the background to the science of cognitive linguistics. Our heroes have proven that the more people talk, the more they reveal. Now, I've loved to hear that David Ogilvy quote. Do you know when that quote was made? 1960. 1960. And people still haven't found ways around it. In 1980, Lakoff and Johnson wrote the seminal work on on metaphors describing one thing in terms of another, and it was called Metaphors We Live By. In 1980, they discovered that this was not to do with linguistics, that the describing things in terms of another affects our behavior and says an awful lot about us. Steven Pinker says it's the stuff of thought. Jamie Pennebaker has written a wonderful book called The Secret Life of Pronouns, just using tiny, tiny words. You know, a woman will use 60,000 more personal pronouns in a year than a man. Okay, that has two psychological attributes. The first one, higher levels of neuroticism. And the second one is higher levels of truthfulness. Okay? Really, really important. And if anybody wants to have a discussion about gender stuff afterwards, I've got loads and loads of stuff about the differences between the genders, and we are massively pro-women. What they showed is that all the words you choose and use are processed almost totally subconsciously. You know that. So I want you to win that bet, and I want you to think about words like we do, okay, in psychological terms, in three ways: head words, body words, and picture words. And I'm going to give you those examples, okay? Head words are conceptual ideas that force our brains to work so hard. These are the words that you use all the time in business. Put up your hand if you think that none of these words are important. These words are incredibly important. They're incredibly important to us, but they are having very, very little emotional connection to people because they force the brain to work too hard. These are big ideas that are not being owned emotionally. Then there are body words. This is the sensory language of which you've heard an awful lot about. Okay, so sensory language can be divided into these five senses. There are other senses. And you're going to hear a lot more about smell tomorrow from Andy at Walnut Unlimited. And the sense of smell is a very, very, very important smell. It tends to be very binary. High levels of disgust to protect us, or high levels of delight when we smell something good. It's a motorway to the brain. 1 synapse in your sense of smell, 5 for your sense of sight. But just by using these words, bodies respond. Using words about heat, sweaty, warm, boiling, starts to warm you up a little bit. If I say kiss or kick, it starts to fire up your motor systems. So people can consume sensory words way, way better than those head words. Body words are brilliant, but they have their issues. But the easiest way for humans to communicate is in the language of pictures. And our minds are full of pictures from when we are very young. We start to associate things with other things. We describe one thing in terms of another. And I'm going to give you some very clear examples of these. So when brand communicators connect to these pictures, that is when you start to own the big ideas. So you need to be able to understand what are the pictures and what are the senses underneath those big ideas. Let me give you some examples of these words and how they're used. The landscape of market research is changing as these ideas from psycholinguistics are flowing into market research best practice. There's a light being shone onto consumer behavior that is clearing the clouds that classic traditional research techniques have given us. This is sparking new conversations and igniting different ways of thinking about how market research can change and evolve. Why is this important? Because there's a battle going on within companies. There's a contest for resources. There's pressure on margins. Budgets are being squeezed, but expectations are rising for what market research has to deliver. They're so high that brand people now expect to have the language and the ideas that are about emotions and how to touch consumers' hearts. How do you do that? By connecting your communications, visual and verbal, to your consumers' word pictures by linking in what you say and do to connect to them. This will move you ahead faster. It will put you ahead in the race to add value and save those precious resources. Just by planting the seeds of listening better, your knowledge will grow and your brand will flourish. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the language of persuasion. It's the language of pictures. You don't even have to think about those. And the words, the way that you choose these frames is absolutely crucial to the way that you communicate. I'm going to show you how people get it wrong. Most brands are just guessing at this. They treat language really, really trivially. But we have this massive psychological resource right in front of us. We did some work with Graham at 602 on universities in America. So here's an idea. Most brands are just guessing. Education as a structure, says Strayer University. We build it so you can bring it. A bit of a mix there. Bring it is a journey. Okay, so does this person, and do people going to Strayer University believe that it's a structure? I don't know. But people at WGU actually think that it's a transformation. Higher education, reinvented, an innovative university. Do people at WGU who are there, I mean, at least she's looking up. This guy's not even, doesn't look like he's building anything, although he may have bricks on his back. Okay. She's looking up, she's looking positive. But is that how students think about education? And here's another one. This is about education is movement. Pursuing new opportunities, working towards something, and interestingly, without putting your life on hold, which is lack of movement. So everything is about movement. So why the hell is she sitting still? You see how these picture words are used, and if you don't understand the pictures inside your consumers' heads, then you're never going to get it right. So you could think about these in terms of System 1 and System 2. Body words, the sensory language, is very difficult for brands to own because it's so easy to copy. You know, a Marks and Spencer's food uses a lot of sensory language, and then what happens? Everybody starts doing it. So they're both used combined with the picture words. But the whole basis of persuasion is these words that we are using in our conversations. You've been hearing them all day, you haven't even thought about them until I've just asked you to think about them. Okay, you have been hearing people implicitly trying to persuade you, sharing their view, sharing value. Here am I doing the motions, okay? Asking to share, they're saying, share my point of view, and we all do it. We all do it. We use these picture words up to 8 times a minute when we speak and up to 12 times a minute when we're writing, when we have something that we wish to persuade people of. So they are incredibly important.